Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining me for a new season of Tales from the Crypt reviews. Today I will be talking about Season 3, Episode 1, Love to Death, directed by Tom Mankiewicz and starring Andrew McCarthy as Edward Foster and Mariel Hemingway as Miranda Singer. And in my opinion, this is a perfectly acceptable, enjoyable, and very funny at times way to start the third season until the ending. Unfortunately, the ending of this episode, in my opinion, was just a little too ridiculous and a little too silly, even for this show, Tales from the Crypt. So we start out with a fantasy sequence, which actually was probably my favorite part of the whole episode. I thought this was pretty funny. I laughed pretty hard at this, with a writer named Edward and a woman named Louise, and they are a very happy couple, and you can tell that Louise really wants Edward in this scene. After this sequence, we find out that this is all what is being written in a script by Edward, and he is a writer that definitely has his mind on love, I guess, is a good way to say it. So after this, we also are introduced to a man who runs the place, the landlord. He will be very important to the story. And another side character named Mrs. Parker. And she's not as important to the story, but she's a funny side character throughout the episode. So at this point, Edward also notices an actress named Miranda, and she looks just like Louise, the woman that he's fantasizing about, the fictional character that he is writing. So that seems pretty convenient for him. Miranda's also on the phone and seems pretty upset at this point. More on that in a little bit. So it turns out that Edward changes the character of Louise to Miranda in his script. So I would say that Edward is definitely infatuated with this woman who he does not yet know. So of course Edward goes to pay Miranda a visit, but she kicks him out pretty quickly, which was amusing. This lady kind of has some pretty drastic mood changes, which fits into the theme of the episode. But she quickly apologizes, they chat, she invites him over later, and everything seems okay. But when Edward comes over later, he finds Miranda with another guy. So I guess their drink is pretty much out of the question at this point. So a day later or a few days later, I'm not really sure, Edward does get to have his drink with Miranda when he comes over. She basically apologizes, but she also wants to be honest with him and says they can never be a couple unless Edward becomes famous. So Edward doesn't like this too much. And when Miranda's on the phone, he has another fantasy sequence, and he actually kind of grabs her around the waist. And in an interesting scene, she basically throws him out and beats him up a little bit. To be fair, he kind of had this coming. So now Edward's pretty desperate. He's not sure what to do. But there might be an answer to his problems. Edward goes to visit his landlord with the rent money. But he winds up, this landlord surprisingly knows all of Edward's troubles, and he offers him a love potion to get the woman of his dreams, so to speak. And as we know, if you've ever watched any fictional story with love potions, this probably will not go well. But Edward, being desperate, takes the potion. One quick word about the landlord character. I thought he was kind of interesting. They kind of made him dark and creepy, but it was a strange tone fit with the rest of the episode, which is pretty light for the most part. But I guess it worked okay. Kind of an interesting character here. So at this point, Edward visits Miranda again, saying he wants to apologize for what happened. She's really not interested in him at all at this point, but she says if he'll leave her alone, she'll agree to the drink. But of course, Edward puts the love potion in her drink. Of course, nothing happens at first, but then all of a sudden, Miranda is really into him. And when I say into him, I mean really into him. They start kissing, and she is all over him. So it looks like Edward's going to get what he wants. Except the problem is now Miranda literally won't ever leave him alone. We get another scene where Edward is basically trying to write his script, but Miranda's distracting him all the time. She wants to make out all the time, and Edward says he's tired, but Miranda basically never runs out of energy, even when he tries to resist. So now Edward's getting a little bit too much of what he wanted. I'll just put it like that. So Edward goes back to visit the landlord, who says there's no antidote, but he does give him some type of poison that is supposed to take care of Miranda, eliminate her. So of course Edward reluctantly decides to go with this, and he goes back and they're going to have a drink, and he puts the poison in Miranda's glass. But of course the glasses get switched, and Edward winds up taking the poison, and he is a goner. So I guess things aren't too bad for Edward. At least he's now free of Miranda forever, except we find out that Miranda was upset at his passing away and she did herself in. So now I guess they're together forever in another life, so to speak. And although this episode was pretty good and the ending does fit the tone of the episode, kind of the dark humor, I did think that the ending was very rushed and the special effects behind it weren't very convincing of the afterlife. And I didn't think the makeup on the Miranda character here was very good either. I just thought the whole ending was unconvincing and a little bit too over the top and ridiculous, even for Tales from the Crypt. But it doesn't completely destroy the rest of the episode, which is amusing if a little inconsistent. And I'm going to give Love to Death a 2.5 out of 5. This is a perfectly watchable episode that fans of the show may enjoy. I just brought the rating down a little bit for the unsatisfying ending, but a decent enough episode. So 2.5 out of 5 for Love to Death. And as always, thank you very much for watching.